It was supposed to be a routine audit, just an old mine inspector sent to cross-check safety reports from a half-century ago. But what he stumbled upon in the forgotten depths of a long-abandoned shaft changed everything. Hidden behind reinforced steel and a concrete seal dated April 25, 1962, was a chamber that shouldn't have existed, untouched, undisturbed, and unrecorded in any official documents. The air inside hadn't moved in over 50 years, but what lay within was far from dead. Inside that room were personal effects, gear belonging to the missing, and something far stranger, a set of government-issued crates, each stamped with a military code that hadn't been used since the height of the Cold War. 17 men had entered the mine in 1962 and never came back. The official story was a gas explosion. But this room, this sealed tomb told another story. A story of betrayal, surveillance, and secrets buried deeper than coal. And for one man, a sheriff with blood ties to the event, this was never just history, it was personal. And once you open a door that was never meant to be found, the truth doesn't stay buried. If this story hits you like it hit us, give it a like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more forbidden history they don't want you to hear. Share this with someone who still believes the official version. Trust us, they won't after this one. The Black Hollow mine had been closed for longer than anyone under 50 could remember. On paper, it was sealed after a methane explosion in 1962 claimed the lives of 17 men. But paper lies, and concrete doesn't lie convincingly enough when someone's finally looking close. The man standing in front of the mine gate that morning wasn't a historian. He wasn't even a local, but what he found would rewrite the most buried pages of county history. The report he was following up on, pure formality. He was just supposed to match old blueprints to survey markers before the mine registry got archived permanently. That's when he saw it, a poured concrete wall, built deeper into the mine than any schematic showed. The wall was marked with a date, April 25, 1962. It was thick, reinforced, and not something you throw together in 2 days. It had a seam cut into the rock behind it, like it was meant to hide something, not protect anything. Behind that wall was a room. A sealed room with no recorded purpose, no ventilation, and no reason to exist, except to disappear from memory. What he found inside changed everything. The air was still, not just stale, sealed. As in, untouched for decades. But the contents, they were personal. 17 lockers, 17 name tags, the same names listed on the fatality report from 1962. Boots, lunch pails, lanterns. All untouched, all placed deliberately, like the men never intended to leave. There was no soot. No evidence of explosion. No buckled walls. This wasn't a blast site. It was a bunker, a hiding place, a prison. One thing was clear. These men weren't killed by a gas leak. They were locked in and left behind. The inspector did what protocol required. He radioed it in. But the minute the call went out, the feed cut off. And when backup arrived, the original inspector was gone. No notes, no body. Just his clipboard, left right outside the mine's lip. The sealed room was real. And now, someone else was missing. That's how Sheriff Mark Danner got involved. He wasn't the kind of man who chased shadows. 20 years on the job had burned that out of him. But when dispatch told him the missing inspector's name was Aaron Danner, his cousin, it wasn't just paperwork anymore. Mark remembered the mine as a story told in whispers. His grandfather used to say it wasn't an accident, just didn't have the proof to prove it. Mark's father never spoke of it at all. Now, the grandson of one of those dead miners had a reason to open old wounds. He stood at the mine gate, same as the inspector. Same faded authorized personnel only signs swinging in the breeze. Same cracked gravel path leading to rusted rails. And that same heaviness in the air, like something under the earth was holding its breath. When he stepped inside, Flashlight sweeping the shaft, he felt it. Not fear, confirmation. That gut-deep awareness that he'd stepped into something already in motion. The mine didn't just feel abandoned, it felt watched. He passed rusted support beams and decades-old safety signs. The walls weren't blackened by fire, no blast patterns, just silence, unrot. Then he found the wall, same as the inspector described. Concrete, sealed with steel mesh, dated April 25, 1962. But this time, someone had cracked it. A man-sized hole had been cut into the base, rough, fresh. Someone had come after the inspector, and they hadn't bothered hiding it. Mark stepped through the breach and entered the sealed room. The air was heavier. Not just stale, but charged, like something wrong had happened here and hadn't dissipated in all these years. And then he saw the lockers, 17 of them, each tagged with a name: Danner, Wexler, Owens, McCabe, names he recognized from childhood stories, faded gravestones, and one long-closed funeral home. The lockers weren't empty. Some had photos, old coins, engraved knives. One had a folded map marked in red pencil. All had a miner's helmet still resting on top. These weren't leftovers. They were ... memorials, but made before the men died. In the far corner, covered in a tarp hardened by time, was something different. Military crates, not coal company issue, not standard gear. Each one had stenciled codes that screamed Cold War. Mark reached for the latch and opened the top box. Inside, not explosives, not tools, but cores, mineral samples. Tagged, dated, and marked property of U.S. Department of Defense. That's when the scale shifted. This wasn't just a mine tragedy. It was a military op, buried under the illusion of an accident. Suddenly, Mark understood why the story had never been questioned, why there had been no real investigation, why the company paid out settlements in weeks. Someone wanted this buried. And when someone wants that badly to bury something, they usually bury the people too. He took photos, every locker, every crate, every detail. But when he turned to leave, he saw something that stopped him cold, a boot print, fresh, not his, leading deeper into the tunnel beyond the sealed room. He followed it, tension rising with every step. The tunnel narrowed, wood gave way to rough stone. Then he found the end, a wall, covered in scratch marks. Not recent, decades old, fingernail marks. 17 names etched one last time. These men had been alive down here. Long after the explosion, long enough to scratch out their names, long enough to know no one was coming. Danner stepped back into the sealed room, a knot in his chest. It wasn't just history down here. It was murder, the quiet kind. The kind that leaves no smoke, no screams, just silence and cement. And now it was happening again. His cousin was gone. The mine had been reopened. And someone was moving in the dark, watching the watchers. Mark didn't need theories anymore. He needed answers. Because someone knew this place had been found again. And whoever had sealed it the first time wasn't finished. Danner emerged from the mine colder than when he'd gone in. But it wasn't the mountain air that shook him. It was the knowledge that someone had been in that sealed room recently. And that they weren't just walking through history. They were maintaining a secret. Back at the sheriff's office, he didn't go to his desk. He went to the evidence room, locked the door, pulled the mine files from archives, found the official report, 17 dead, cause, gas explosion, no survivors, mine permanently sealed April 26th, all neat, all clean, all a lie. He flipped to the names. His grandfather, Richard Danner, was listed as the shift foreman. And there it was again, the same name he'd just seen carved into the tunnel wall with a broken fingernail. He remembered the old man's photo on the mantel. Never smiling, always tired. Now he knew why. The case file was thin, too thin. 1 page from the fire department, 1 from the mining board, a newspaper clipping, and a typed summary from the sheriff at the time. No photos, no autopsy reports, no body list, and every signature stamped, not signed. He called the state mining office, but their digital archives didn't go back far enough. No record of Black Hollow after 1961, the clerk said. Nothing on file about an explosion. It was the same trick used in half-buried cases. Erase just enough paper and hope nobody asks questions. But Dana wasn't just a name on a file anymore. His blood was in that tunnel. And now, maybe his cousin's too. He needed someone who remembered. Someone who'd been there when it happened. If anyone was still alive from the original town crew, they'd be pushing 80. He started with the oldest man he knew, Harold Bledsoe, a retired dispatcher who had worked for the county back in the 60s. He found him in a rehab home outside town. Dana didn't need to ask twice. The moment he mentioned Black Hollow, Bledsoe's hand trembled. They told us it was a cave-in, Harold whispered. But I saw the trucks, government trucks. Came in 2 days before the blast, flatbeds with no plates. Men in suits carrying rifles, like they weren't afraid to be seen. I told my supervisor. He told me to shut my damn mouth. What were they doing there? Dan asked. I don't know, but the morning after the explosion, they sealed the mine fast. Too fast. Nobody even searched. One deputy tried to ask questions. Collins, I think. He was gone by the end of the week, said he transferred. But I heard he drove off the ridge one night. Straight drop. Dana's pen froze. You think he was killed? Harold's stare was cold. I think men like that don't just quit. And nobody ever really left that mine. They just got buried without funerals. That was enough. Dana went back to the evidence board, cleared it, and started fresh. He posted the 17 names. The photo of the concrete wall, the military crates. Then he added one more, Aaron Dana, missing 48 hours. He drove out to the original site again, just before sunset. The mine was quiet, too quiet, but tire tracks crisscrossed the gravel lot. Not the kind of patterns made by hikers or explorers. These were heavy-duty, industrial tread. As if someone had been unloading equipment, he followed the tracks toward the tree line where the old supply road used to run. That's where he saw it, the glint of metal under some fallen brush, a trail camera, new, recently mounted, and active, watching the path toward the mine. Watching him, he didn't touch it, just photographed it, then scanned the forest. Whoever had placed that camera had access, authority, and a reason to monitor the area without alerting local law enforcement. This wasn't some prepper group or trespassing teenagers. This was strategic. Back in town, he noticed things shifting. A white SUV he didn't recognize parked across from his house. A man in a windbreaker loitering near the grocery store entrance when he went to grab coffee. Always alone, always watching, and always gone the moment he turned to look twice. The next day, someone tried to access his office. The lock was scraped, nothing taken, just a sign. A message, back off. It only hardened his resolve. The deeper he dug, the more personal it became. A lead came from an unexpected place. A retired utility worker named Gus Malone, who used to inspect underground wiring systems. I knew something was wrong back then, Gus said. We had a repair order for the area 2 days before the explosion. But when we showed up, we were told the job was cancelled. Cancelled by who? Dana asked. Not the mining company. Some guy in a dark suit with a badge that didn't match any state department. Said if we didn't want to lose our contracts, we should turn the truck around and forget we ever got the call. That confirmed it. There had been eyes on that mine long before the so-called accident. And those eyes had power. Power to bury an entire workforce. Power to alter reports, erase witnesses, and monitor local law enforcement 50 years later. Dana sat alone in his living room at night, files spread across the table, photos clipped to string, the timeline farming piece by piece. April 22nd, trucks arrive. April 23rd, miners descend. April 24th, Site sealed. April 25th. Room walled off. No fire. No rescue. No bodies recovered. And now, 2025. A sealed room discovered. A fresh footprint. A missing inspector. And a sheriff being warned off his own family's truth. That was the final push. He made one more call. To an old friend in state records who owed him favors. "I need the original land lease for Black Hollow," he said. "Not the coal company's version. The military attachment, if it exists. And get me anything labeled Section 4 to be." There was a pause on the other end. "That's restricted. You sure about this?" "Yeah," Dana said, eyes fixed on the black and white photo of his grandfather in miner's gear. "I'm done playing sheriff. It's time someone blew the doors off this thing." Dana barely slept. The dreams weren't dreams anymore, just flashes of earth swallowing men whole, his grandfather's name scratched into stone, and sealed steel that pulsed like a prison heartbeat. Morning brought no clarity, just silence, and the new envelope taped to his truck windshield. No stamp, no handwriting, just a black envelope, slick and sealed. Inside was a single photograph, his cousin, Aaron, standing near the breach in the mine wall, flashlight in one hand, mouth slightly open. Taken from behind, taken without him knowing. Whoever took this photo was already inside the mine, unwatching. There was no note, no threat, but Dana didn't need one. This wasn't intimidation. It was positioning. Someone was letting him know how far behind he already was. That this wasn't just an investigation. It was a race, and he'd started late. Back at the office, he called the contact from the state archive again. The man answered quicker this time. "You were right," he said. "There is a Section 4 to be. And you didn't hear that from me. It's not under Department of Mining. It's under Homeland Energy Projects. Classified Cold War tire. What was Black Hollow classified as? Restricted Energy Corridor, minus 1,961. The man's voice dropped. "That's uranium, sheriff, or worse. Whatever they pulled out of there, they didn't want civilians involved." And guess who approved the site authorization? Not the mining board, not the state. It came from Washington. That was the pivot point. Dana pulled up every trace he could on Homeland Energy Projects. Most links were dead ends. A shell agency, folded into other programs after the Cold War, but one name kept surfacing. Whitaker Unlock Consulting, Defense Contractors, GeoSurvey, Resource Logistics. He drove 3 hours to a forgotten warehouse in Clarksburg, where the company used to operate out of. Most of the building was gutted, but records had weight, and the floor still creaked beneath file drawers bolted to the foundation. One drawer stuck out more than the rest. Inside, blueprints, mining drafts. A series of updates made between April 16th and April 22nd, 1962. The last modification showed something strange, a vertical shaft labeled Chamber B, not on any public record. Not on any coal company map, but it matched the direction of the scratch marks inside the sealed room, and handwritten in the corner of one of the drafts. "Do not breach, final extraction complete. Site stable, secondary chamber sealed under 4 to be directive. Awaiting removal, initialed." R. Dana ran the initials through every name tied to the operation. Then something clicked. The 1962 report had been filed by Raymond Mercer, listed as Safety Oversight Director for Cumberland Coal, but no personnel records existed for him. No address, no license, nothing. He wasn't real. He was a ghost in the system. Probably military, probably operating undercover to supervise the shutdown. Dana circled the name and wrote one word underneath: handler. By the time he got back to town, a second SUV was parked down the street from his house. Different plate, same pasture. Dana didn't confront them. He didn't need to. He was no longer just being watched. He was being evaluated, measured, and someone was preparing a response. That night, he went back into the mine, alone. The air was colder now, less like temperature, more like warning. He scanned the walls of the sealed room again, searching for something he'd missed. That's when he saw it, a tiny hatch in the floor, rusted shut, bolted under one of the crates. Prying it open revealed a shaft, narrow, straight drop. A rope ladder, long rotted, dangled into the dark. The air that came out wasn't just stale. It was different, richer, metallic. Like the ground itself was breathing something unnatural. Dana lowered himself down, slow and steady. Every foot he dropped, the silence deepened. At the bottom was a small chamber, circular, maybe 15 feet wide, walls reinforced with steel. And in the center, three things: a generator, a stack of crates, and a recorder. He flicked on the recorder. The tape had degraded, but he could hear a man's voice, calm, low, sealed on April 24th. Subjects were instructed to remain calm. Containment protocol initiated. Refusal to comply will result in immediate correction. Operation Black Hollow remains active until further directive. Subjects, not victims. Containment, not rescue. These men weren't trapped. They were locked away, on purpose. Mark hit stop. Took the recorder, bagged it. Then turned to the crates, inside. Not weapons. Not documents, but stone, cut slabs of ore, still glowing faintly under his flashlight. Markings scratched into the edges, foreign, geometric, like language, but not one spoken aloud. It wasn't just uranium. It was something else. He backed out fast, climbed the ladder, sealed the hatch. He had seen enough. The government hadn't just extracted rare minerals. They had buried something they couldn't control. And 17 men had gotten in the way, outside the mine. He was met with headlights. A black sedan, government-issued plates. A man stepped out, mid-50s, suit, calm. "Sheriff Dana," he said. "My name is Elias Brandt. I'm with the Department of Historical Risk Management. We need to talk." Dana kept his hand near his sidearm. "That department doesn't exist." Brandt smiled. "Exactly." Dana didn't invite Brandt inside. He didn't need to. Whatever this man wanted to say, it was clear he had the clearance, and the confidence to say it right there in the dark, where voices didn't echo, and no one else could hear them. Brandt walked slowly, hands in his pockets, no visible weapon. That was how these types worked. They didn't carry muscle, they called it. "You've seen the chamber," he said flatly. "We assumed that seal would last longer. Your cousin changed the timeline." Dana's jaw clenched. "He's gone. What did you do to him?" "We didn't do anything. We sent a team to contain the breach. When they arrived, he'd already been taken. We suspect a third party is now involved. Likely someone with prior knowledge of the mine's value." "What value?" Dana asked, knowing the answer wouldn't come clean. Brandt didn't blink. "Extraction data from 1960 to estimated deposits exceeding 3.7 million metric tons of high-yield uranium, thorium, and anomalous trace elements, some of which don't exist on any current civilian periodic tables." Dana narrowed his eyes. "And the men who were buried down there, collateral." Brandt said the word like it was printed on a ledger. "They were offered relocation, compensation, secrecy. Most refused. A few cooperated. Those who didn't were contained under federal directive. Presidential authorization. You murdered 17 men to protect rock." "No," Brandt replied. "We secured the continuity of military superiority during a period of extreme geopolitical instability. The rocks were simply leverage." Dana stepped closer. "And now that I've seen it, what happens to me?" "That depends," Brandt said. "We can offer you what we offered them. A name change, new role, clean file, no questions. Or we can escalate. And we both know what that looks like." Dana stared at him, weighing his next words like they could tip the world off balance. "My grandfather died in that mine. I'm not going anywhere. And if I disappear, every file I've copied goes public." Brandt sighed. "I hoped you'd be more pragmatic." He turned to leave, but paused. "The men who sealed that chamber in 1962 weren't just soldiers. They were scientists, engineers, and yes, executioners. What they buried down there wasn't just ore. It was reactive. And now it's waking up. That phrase stuck with Dana all night. It's waking up, not metaphor, not fear. A statement, cold and clinical, like reading a clock. The next morning, Dana got the call he'd been expecting, but not the voice. "This is Deputy Ellis," the young man said. "We've had an incident near the mine site. Some kids trespass past the posted gate. One of them's in shock. Says he saw someone underground." Dana's stomach dropped. "Alive, according to the kid, yeah. But not recent." Said the guy looked wrong. Skin pale, eyes cloudy. Wearing a miner's uniform from the 60s. Dana was in his truck before Ellis finished the sentence. At the site, the kid was sitting on the tailgate of a patrol truck, wrapped in a blanket. He looked more scared than hurt, but when Dana asked what he saw, the answer froze him. "I thought it was a dummy at first," the boy stammered. "Like one of those training things, but it moved. It looked at me. Its face ... It was like it hadn't aged. But it wasn't alive either. It just watched. Then it backed into the tunnel and was gone." Dana walked the tunnel alone this time. Not into the sealed room, but toward the secondary shaft he'd uncovered. The one with the hatch. He lowered himself again, this time armed, alert, listening. Halfway down, he heard breathing. But not his own. When his boots hit bottom, the chamber was darker than before. The generator was still, the tape recorder gone, but something else had been disturbed. One of the crates, the one holding the slab with geometric carvings, had been smashed open, and next to it, boot prints, not his, small, light, moving erratically, like someone unsure of the floor beneath them. And one streak of dried blood dragged across the metal plating toward the far wall. He followed it, weapon drawn. The wall was smeared, not just blood, but handprints, multiple, as if someone had been clawing at it, desperate. And at the base of the wall, a boot. An old mining boot, inside, a fractured foot bone still wedged tight. 17 miners went in, none came out, but someone or something had never stopped trying. Back at the office, Dana updated the board. Under the list of names, he scratched in a new one, Subject X, unidentified entity. He circled it and underlined the word the kid used, watched. He called Deputy Ellis, double the perimeter security. "No one enters at site without me." Then he called the state coroner. "If I send you a bone, can you age it, fast?" The coroner agreed, but the next day, the report came back faster than expected. "Sheriff, that bone, it's recent, no more than 2 weeks old." "That's impossible," Dana said. "I'd agree, unless you think that bone was still inside a living foot last month." The time for hesitation was over. Dana wasn't just chasing old secrets anymore. Something, or someone, had survived down there, and whatever it was, it wasn't finished yet. He typed a report. Not for state records, for himself, a line to be read if anything happened to him. The final sentence was simple. "If I vanish, don't believe the obituary. Go to the mine, open the hatch, and for the love of God, look at the walls." The map was older than the mine itself, hand-drawn, yellowing at the edges, and stained with coal dust. Dana had found it folded inside a locker in the sealed room. At first, it looked like a routine layout, tunnels, ventilation shafts, emergency exits. But the red markings weren't routine, they were warnings. Circles, slashes, and arrows pointed to dead ends that weren't on any corporate blueprint. Areas marked with cryptic initials, P-Zone, Level 4D, and most ominously, no entry after April 20th. That was 3 days before the supposed explosion. He spread the map across his desk. It didn't match the official records. If this was real, it meant someone had drawn an entirely different layout of the mine just days before everything was shut down, and deliberately omitted it from the public archive. There were also initials at the bottom. RM again, Raymond Mercer, or whoever had used the name, had annotated the map by hand. But there was one marking that drew Dana's attention more than the rest. A tiny box labeled Echo Room. It was far from the main chamber, beyond the sealed room and past the vertical shaft. Deep, hidden, and cut off from all ventilation paths. According to this map, it had no official purpose. It simply existed, like a footnote in the dark. He brought the photo of the boot he'd recovered, the one with fresh bones still inside, and lined it up with the markings. The drag marks in the tunnel matched the direction of the Echo Room. Whoever, or whatever, had moved in the lower levels had been trying to reach it. The name echoed in his head. Echo Room. What kind of place earns that name? A space where sound bounces endlessly, or where voices were meant to be trapped. Dana called Deputy Ellis again. I'm going back in. If I don't call in 90 minutes, send state backup, not locals. Tell them to come armed. He didn't bring anyone else, not this deep. Not where maps were hand-drawn and walls kept secrets longer than most men lived. He loaded extra batteries, backup radio, and slipped a hand recorder in his coat pocket, just in case. Back through the sealed room, down the shaft, past the broken crate, into the crawl space on the far side of the lower chamber. The deeper he moved, the more unnatural the silence became. Like the mine had stopped being a place and turned into a thing, a witness that refused to speak. The path to the Echo Room was narrow, just wide enough to crawl. Halfway through, he found a dead lantern. The old kind, glass cracked, wick burned down. Someone had been here, and not just recently. This had been used back in '62. The tunnel opened into a chamber so quiet, he could hear the blood moving in his ears. A circular room, smoothed by hand, walls covered in strange carvings, the same geometry he'd seen etched into the ore samples, except these weren't accidental. These were written, in the center, a table. Not a miner's table, something older. Stone, with grooves cut into the edges. There was ash in the grooves. And next to it, something worse, a journal. Dana opened it with gloved hands. The first page was intact. Project Echo Logbook Lead Observer. LT. On Mercer status. Phase 3 activation date. April 19, 1962. Every line after that read like madness. Day 1. Test sample triggered abnormal frequency vibration. 7 subjects report auditory hallucinations. Day 2. Core temperature rose, despite no external heat source. Emergency cool down failed. Subject containment breached. Manual lockdown ordered. Day 3. Personnel exposed to sonic loop, unable to maintain language function. Echo Room sealed. Subjects moved to isolation. Dana felt his throat dry. This wasn't a mining project. It was a field test. Not for resource extraction, but for something experimental. And the subjects, they weren't rocks. He scanned more pages. Diagrams of human brains, pulse readings, audio frequency patterns, pages labeled cognitive bleed and neurological collapse. Whatever this room was, it wasn't built by miners. It was repurposed by people who wanted to see what the mine could do to people. The final entry stopped him cold. April 23, 1962. Breach confirmed. Subjects unresponsive. Containment compromised. Begin cover protocol. Seal Echo Room. Initiate narrative overwrite. Final memo to command. This place speaks. And the dead are still listening. Dana stepped back. Suddenly, he did hear something. A hum, faint, below the threshold of conscious sound, but real. It came from the walls, a subsonic vibration, constant, pulsing like a buried signal. And it wasn't just sound, it was direction. He followed it to the far side of the room. Another marking etched in red chalk. Don't open. Below it, a seam in the wall. A door, fused shut, bolted in 7 places. Each bolt marked with a strange symbol. He reached toward it, but something in his spine pulled back. Instinct. Or maybe fear. Or maybe something deeper. The message was clear. Whatever lay behind that wall had driven men mad, and was still humming in the stone. He recorded the whole thing, every wall, every mark, every page in the journal. Then he turned to leave. That's when he heard the sound again. Not the hum, something else, breathing, not his. He turned, weapon drawn. The light hit a shape, hunched, unmoving. A figure, wearing a coal miner's jacket. Face obscured, not moving. But watching. "Who are you?" Dan asked. The figure didn't reply, just tilted its head. Then vanished into the dark like it had never been there. Dana didn't follow. Not this time. He left fast. Faster than he ever had before. Because what he saw in that room wasn't just a man. It was memory given shape. And it wanted him to see it. By the time Dana emerged from the mine, the sun was gone, and the horizon bled amber through the tree line. He didn't drive home. He sat in his truck, engine off, listening to the silence as if it might change its shape or give something away. That hum hadn't left his ears, not completely. It lingered like the memory of pressure, like sound woven into bone. He knew something had shifted, not just in the mine but in him. The journal in his hand wasn't history. It was a warning, and now he was part of it. He didn't file a report. There was no section in the sheriff's database for weaponized subsonic frequency discovered in forgotten Cold War test site beneath sealed tomb. Instead, he printed the photos, made copies of the journal scans, and hid a duplicate flash drive inside the hollow wall behind his gun locker. He wasn't paranoid, not yet. But the man in the suit had called the operation active. That meant it never stopped. And active things have handlers, budgets, silence protocols and enemies who never appear on record. Sleep became useless. Dana stayed up all night reading the journal front to back again, this time with a highlighter. He found patterns in the madness. Each phase of Project Echo wasn't just scientific, it was ritualistic. Test, observe, seal, erase, repeat. The Echo Room wasn't named for acoustics. It was named for the phenomenon itself, the effect of sound bouncing off human cognition until it changed the way a person thought. Or died. The mine wasn't collapsing. It was converting people. He remembered the kid's testimony, the figure underground, who didn't move like a living man. The blood, the boot, the broken recorder. It all pointed to something worse than containment, not just survival, but transformation. And if something from the 1962 crew had survived, what had it become after 50 years in total darkness, surrounded by unfiltered resonance? The thought wasn't just unsettling, it was sobering. Not all men who vanish are gone. Some stay behind and become something else. As the hours passed, he kept circling one entry in the journal. A single line scratched in tighter ink than the rest. When the wall breathes, the room remembers. It didn't sound like science. It sounded like surrender. Like someone who had heard something too long and couldn't stop it. He had seen those carving shapes, like sound waves etched in stone, markings that felt older than the mine itself. The deeper question was clawing at him now. What if this mine wasn't just a Cold War experiment? What if it was discovered, not built? The old-timers in town used to tell stories about strange noises in the mountains. How birds stopped flying near Black Hollow. How dogs refused to go near the ridge. Dana used to chalk that up to superstition. Now he wasn't so sure. The military didn't operate in myth. They saw patterns, tested anomalies, and covered them up when the truth got too loud. The sealed room wasn't a grave. It was a vault. The kind you build when something you don't understand starts to act like it understands you. He called Gus Malone again, the utility worker who'd once been turned away from the mine days before the shutdown. Dana asked him one question. Did you hear anything that day? Gus didn't even hesitate. It wasn't the explosion that scared me. It was what came before, a low whine, like metal singing. My partner said it felt like his teeth were vibrating. He never worked underground again. That was it. More than radiation, more than secrecy. This mine had a voice and some men heard it too clearly. By the next morning, Dana got another visitor. Not Brandt, not a suit. A man in jeans, boots, military posture still ingrained in his stance. He said his name was Kepler, retired army, showed no ID, just asked to talk. Said he'd worked echo protocols in Germany back in the 80s. Dana let him in. Not because he trusted him, but because the man's eyes didn't lie. He looked like someone who'd heard the hum and never forgotten it. Kepler sat down without ceremony and got right to it. He said echo wasn't just one site. It was a pattern. Certain geolocations where sound reacted unnaturally to space and structure. The government had catalogued them. Some were mines, some were caves. A few were decommissioned missile silos. They called them resonance zones. Black Hollow was one of the first discovered and the first to go completely dark for a containment failure. Dana asked him what caused it. Kepler just stared at the floor. They say it's natural. I don't buy that. Something old is buried in those places. Something that responds when you listen long enough. Dana pushed further. What had the project actually done in those places? Kepler answered without blinking. They fed it. Frequencies, patterns, language. We thought we were testing the rock. But eventually, we were the ones being tested. That word again, tested, just like the miners. Just like Aaron. Dana didn't ask why Kepler had come. He already knew. The moment the sealed room was opened, the hum restarted. It had been waiting. The old man warned him of one final thing. Echo doesn't just echo sound. It echoes memory, trauma, identity. It learns the minds of those inside it. That's why the miners saw things before the end. They weren't hallucinating. They were being mirrored. That was the last straw. If that mine was mirroring the dead worse, resurrecting fragments of them, it had to be shut permanently, not just sealed, destroyed. That night, Dana didn't sleep. He spent it researching demolition schematics, geological weaknesses, and underground demolition techniques. If he couldn't stop what was happening inside the echo room, maybe he could collapse the access points and trap whatever was left. It was a long shot, but men like him didn't wait for the dark to crawl out and come knocking. The last thing he did was write a letter, a real one, pen and paper, no copies. No digital trails, just a warning in plain ink. He left it with Gus, sealed and dated. If I don't come back in 48 hours, send this to the national press. Every channel you can. Gus nodded. No questions. Just old eyes that had seen enough secrets to know when one needed daylight. At dawn, Dana suited up. Tactical gear, charges, radio dead on arrival. He didn't care. He wasn't going in to report. He was going in to finish. The mine greeted him like a grave, but this time he didn't hesitate. He moved through the dark like a man who had memorized every echo, every seam, every wrong turn. He was no longer a sheriff. He was the final witness. Inside the lower chamber, the hum was louder. The wall at the far end, the one marked "Don't Open," was now different. One bolt undone, symbols rearranged. Someone or something had been tampering. He placed the charges but hesitated before arming them. There was still one question burning in his head. Was someone alive behind that wall? Because if so, the next few seconds would either end a secret or bury the last human to ever understand it. He stepped back, hand on the trigger, heart steady. No fear, just clarity. His grandfather had died here. His cousin had vanished here. And maybe now it was his turn. The hum pulsed, the walls trembled, and in that breathless pause between thought and action, something spoke not in words, but in memory. His own voice echoed back at him. We never left. He triggered the blast. The explosion wasn't loud in the way you'd expect. Underground, sound doesn't echo, it compresses, collapses, swallows itself. What Dana heard was a deep, thick snap, like a joint dislocating beneath the surface of the world. Then the floor shook, dust dropped from the rafters. The mine exhaled, and then silence. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was still intact. The charges hadn't failed. They'd done exactly what he calculated collapsed the passage behind the echo room, sealing off the secondary chamber for good. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a warning shot. Because that low vibration, the hum that had threaded itself through every inch of that mine, hadn't stopped. It had only shifted, moved deeper. Dana climbed out of the shaft and emerged into the sealed room once more. Everything felt different now, like the mine had acknowledged what he'd done. The air was denser, not hotter, just heavier. And in the corner, by the crates, was something new, a helmet, fresh, dustless, not there before. And inside it, a note, folded, written in his own handwriting. He stared at it for too long before touching it. He knew it hadn't been there when he entered. No one could have passed him. No prints, no tracks. Just the helmet, waiting like it had been placed. Like someone or something wanted him to see it. He unfolded the paper, hands steady, mind racing. It read, "You're not the first Dana to try this." That single line fractured something in him. This wasn't just his grandfather's grave. It was his unfinished mission. The man hadn't just died here. He'd tried to stop it, failed, and now, generations later, the Echo hadn't just found another host, it had chosen the same bloodline. Which meant the connection between the mine and the Danas wasn't coincidence. It was tethered. He pocketed the note, grabbed the helmet, and climbed back to the surface. When he stepped into the daylight, everything felt muted. The sounds of birds, wind, even distant traffic seemed dulled, not gone, just suppressed. Like something had swallowed the natural rhythm of the outside world and left only shadows. He didn't go home. He drove to the one place that still had physical records no one could erase remotely, the county survey office. Buried in the basement were the original mining proposals from the 1950s. He knew the mine had operated for coal. But when he found the earliest land contract, his breath caught. The listed objective wasn't coal. It was acoustic bedrock density testing. Dana sat down and read the contract twice. It had been signed by 3 men. The third name was Raymond Mercer, the second Richard Dana. His grandfather hadn't just worked in the mine. He'd co-signed its initial funding request. That changed everything. He hadn't been caught in the event. He'd been involved from the beginning. He pulled every file tied to Richard Dana from the archives. Most were payroll, employment history, civic permits, but one stood out. A sealed envelope labeled transfer request, reassignment pending, dated April 20th, 1962, 3 days before the mine was sealed. Inside, a handwritten plea. "I've changed my mind. The test is not stable. We're not ready. Requesting immediate evacuation protocol." It had never been sent. No response. Just filed, sealed, and buried. His grandfather had tried to stop it, just like he had. And both had underestimated how far the people behind this thing would go to silence one man's doubt. Dana's hands trembled for the first time in weeks. This wasn't a legacy, it was a curse. One passed from father to son through silence and stone. He realized now that every official who touched the project had disappeared, retired early, or transferred. The only ones left were the dead and the descendants who asked too many questions. He returned home and found his front door ajar, not kicked in, just unlocked. As if whoever had entered wanted him to know they weren't afraid of him. He moved through the rooms carefully, sidearm drawn. Nothing was missing, nothing vandalized. But every drawer was open, every folder on his desk had been read. And on his kitchen table, a cassette player. Identical to the one he'd found underground, it was already playing. The voice was his own, a recording he'd never made. "They never left," it said. "They're still in the rock, still watching, still listening." Then silence, then static, then breathing, not his. Someone else's, close, labored, a man. Then the tape clicked off. Dana stared at the recorder, bile in his throat. He'd never recorded that message, but somehow his voice had. And that's when he remembered what Kepler had warned him. The mind doesn't just echo sound, it echoes identity. It remembers you, replays you, even without your consent. He smashed the tape, not out of panic, out of necessity. That sound couldn't be allowed to live outside the mine. Not anymore, he called Gus. We're past the point of waiting. Send the letters, all of them, every copy. Use the list I gave you. Gus didn't ask questions, just said, God help us, and hung up. Dana sat in the quiet of his living room and watched the sun lower past the trees. He didn't know what would come next. But he knew this much: whatever force lived beneath Black Hollow, it wasn't buried. It was awake, and it was moving. The mine had been a cage. The hum, the resonance, the symbols, they weren't containment, they were rituals. Systems of control designed not to imprison a creature, but to keep it from becoming one. Every man who heard the hum became a version of himself that didn't die, that waited. He loaded his gear one more time, not to go back in, but to prepare for what would come out. The sealed room had failed, the echo room had been disturbed, and now, whatever waited behind those bolts had tasted movement again. He could feel it, the same way his grandfather had. Before nightfall, he drove to the old church on the outskirts of town, not for faith, for insulation. The thick walls and absence of modern wiring made it the only place left where he could think without interference. He wrote everything down by hand, then burned the pages after copying them into a secure drive hidden inside a cemetery vault behind the church. He stared at the gravestones. Some of the names matched the ones from the mine. No bodies, no closure, just stones marking memories. And maybe, if the stories were true, those men never left at all, not in the ghost sense. In the replication sense, echoes, fragments, pieces of men still alive in sound. As he left the church grounds, a text came through on the encrypted phone Kepler had given him. One line, no number, just, they're already topside. Dana didn't drive straight back to town. He didn't trust his home, his office, or any signal that touched a satellite. The phone from Kepler didn't allow outgoing calls, only inbound. That meant whoever sent that message wanted him silent, reactive, and unsure of how much they already knew. But the implication was clear. If they were topside, then the containment had failed completely. Something had moved beyond the rock, and it had found legs. He took the long route through the back roads, cutting through forest trails only locals knew. No tail, no drones, no sign of surveillance. Still, every nerve in his spine was lit like an electric wire. The text hadn't said what they were, but it wasn't a warning, it was a statement. And Dana didn't need anyone to define the term. He'd seen the figure in the shaft. He'd heard the breathing on the tape. He'd read the project notes. Echo didn't destroy men. It changed them, copied them, fragmented their minds until the residue of who they were lingered like smoke after a burn. At the edge of town, the street lights buzzed unnaturally. Not flickering, just offbeat. That same low-frequency interference again. A resonance that had no source, but always knew where to be. Dana drove past the hardware store and saw a shape in the doorway, man-sized, perfectly still. Just watching the road, no coat, no movement. When he stopped the car and looked again, it was gone, vanished without trace or footfall. He didn't check. He knew it would be empty. The gas station was closed early, unusual. It ran 24 hours, always manned by some overworked college kid. The sign said system maintenance, but the windows were dark, and the door was unlocked. Dana pushed it open, hand on his holster, nothing inside. But every radio on the shelf had turned itself on. Same frequency, white noise, low from beneath it. And on the counter, scribbled in grease pencil, 2 words, help US. He backed out slowly. This wasn't a spread of infection. It was an awakening, a system of identity fractures reaching through frequencies, copying thought, relaying presence. Whoever or whatever had been trapped in the echo room was no longer isolated. It was networked, and the devices in town were no longer tools. They were mirrors. Back at the station, Deputy Ellis looked shaken. "You need to see this," he said, leading Dana to the holding cells. Inside one sat a man picked up earlier that day, disoriented, silent, no ID, covered in coal dust, wearing clothes that hadn't been manufactured since 1960. He was found walking the trestle bridge. No shoes, no wounds, but he hasn't blinked in over an hour. Dana approached the glass. The man looked up at him, slow and deliberate. His face was gaunt, pale, eyelids dry. And then, without speaking, he mouthed 3 words. "It heard me." Dana stepped back. Ellis asked what he said, but Dana didn't answer. He couldn't. That man had spoken without voice, and Dana still heard it in his mind. He ordered the cell locked, no visitors, and all electronics removed. "Treat him like a live wire," Dana said. "No exposure, no recordings, not even paper. If he starts drawing, you tell me immediately." Ellis didn't question it. He'd seen enough now to stop asking. That night, Dana traced the origins of the first disturbance outside the mine. He charted sightings, radio malfunctions, and reports of shadow figures. They formed a pattern, a spiral radiating outward from the shaft breach. But it wasn't random. The sightings followed the electrical grid. It wasn't traveling through roads or water. It was following signal paths. That explained the tape recorder, the cassettes, the old helmet, the messages in his own handwriting. It wasn't just watching him, it was replicating him. Using voice, thought, memory, it was building a library of him. And if it had a library of him, it could start building versions of him. Duplicates that knew just enough to pass. At first, he called Kepler again. The old man didn't waste time. "I told you," he said. "Once it gets outside the source chamber, it doesn't need proximity. It just needs resonance. Anything that carries a signal is a carrier. Power lines, phone towers, even old radio towers. It will spread like a nervous system." Dana asked how to stop it. The answer came like a punch. "You can't, not with brute force. The only way to stop it is to sever memory, remove identity, kill every trace of what it's using to replicate." That meant burning the files, destroying the evidence, wiping every name, image, and log that connected the entity to the 1962 crew. It wasn't about keeping the truth. It was about starving the mechanism. If Echo needed identity to echo, it needed someone to remember those men. So Dana made a decision no sheriff should ever have to make. He walked into the county archive and torched it. Files, reports, physical evidence. All of it, gone. He watched it burn in silence, not as a coward, but as a man who finally understood that some history was too dangerous to preserve, and even more dangerous to recall. The fire drew attention, but no questions. The few who saw it were already on edge. The town felt wrong now. Lights to dim, shadows to still, conversations to short, and the man in the holding cell. He vanished by morning. No struggle, no sign of forced escape. The door never opened. He was just gone. Cell camera wiped, logs deleted. As if he'd never been there. Deputy Ellis quit the same day. Left town without a word. Dana didn't stop him. One less name in the memory pool meant one less echo for the entity to mimic. It was cruel logic, but it was the only thing that made sense now. The last thing Dana did was isolate himself. No electronics, no phone, no radio. Just a notebook and a locked room in the abandoned ranger station on the North Ridge. There, he wrote his final entry. Not for the town, not for the government. For the next man who might find the mine, the next man to hear the hum. He closed it with one line. If you hear it, leave. If it answers, run. If it calls your name, it's already too late. Then he left the notebook, walked out the door, and disappeared into the hills. The ranger station stood quiet 4 weeks after Dana vanished. No calls, no footprints. Just the notebook on the desk, and the sheriff's badge resting beside it like a silent surrender. Most in town assumed he'd cracked under pressure. Some said he'd left to chase a conspiracy, but a few, the ones who knew, understood. He hadn't run, he'd quarantined himself. Then, 3 weeks later, the sightings started. Not in the woods, not in the mine. In homes, offices, parking lots, men standing perfectly still. Always male, always average height. Same clothing, same posture, never talking. Never reacting, just watching. The first report came from an electrical worker, fixing a transformer near the edge of town. He said he saw a man standing behind a utility pole. When he turned around, it was gone. He laughed it off until he saw the same man again that night, at his window, staring in. Within days, 5 more sightings came in. Always the same figure, face unreadable, expression blank. But something about the stillness, it unsettled people deeper than fear. They weren't threatening, but they weren't human either. Like the silhouette of something mimicking form, without understanding it. They came to be called static men, not ghosts, not intruders, just placeholders. Their presence was usually followed by device malfunctions. Radios turning on, TVs fuzzing out, phones ringing from blocked numbers. A cold, low buzz that lingered in rooms long after they vanished. It wasn't supernatural. It was procedural. Local news never picked it up, but Dana's notebook had predicted it. Page 47. Once replication reaches critical mass, prototypes begin exploring exposure routes. Static forms appear first, observation, calibration, then signal testing. It was all there, step by step. The mine hadn't just birthed something, it had deployed it. Gus Malone, the old utility worker, had kept the notebook. He read it every night, hoping to understand what Dana meant. But it wasn't until he saw a static man himself standing across the street from the post office that it all connected. The mine hadn't been a secret project, it had been a training ground. He took the notebook to Kepler. The old man hadn't left town either. He'd moved off-grid, hidden in the woods with analog gear and enough supplies to last a winter. Gus found him chopping wood. Kepler didn't speak, just read the notebook with slow, hard eyes. Then he pointed to one sentence. Echo responds to familiarity. The more you think about it, the closer it gets. That's why Dana had disappeared. He wasn't hiding from Echo. He was trying not to feed it. Every thought, every memory, every piece of written information made it stronger. Not like a virus, but like a mirror gaining clarity every time someone looked into it. That was the real danger. It didn't need to invade. It only needed to be understood. Kepler explained the static men with calm authority, their shells, not fully formed. Think of them like test balloons running diagnostics. They watch for resonance, see who notices them, who flinches, who stares too long. Then they build deeper copies from those reactions. Eventually, they'll start talking. Gus asked what happens then. Kepler just nodded toward the trees. Then they won't need the mine anymore. They'll have the map of us. That was the last time anyone saw Kepler. By the time Gus returned a week later, his shack was burned, no body. Just scorched paper and a cassette still spinning in the ash. The static men started showing up farther out, rest stops, gas stations. Highway motels, always just standing, never entering. But one night, a trucker pulled over on Route 12 and claimed one had stepped into the road. He swerved, crashed into a ditch, broke his arm. When asked what it looked like, he said, "It looked like my brother, but he died 2 years ago." That's when it changed. Echo wasn't just copying forms, now it was copying faces, personal ones. Pulling identities from people's memories, friends, relatives, lost soldiers. The closer the memory, the stronger the echo. It wasn't haunting, it was reconstruction through grief, a parasite feeding on longing. A new theory emerged, one that chilled Gus to the core. What if the miners who vanished weren't just buried? What if they'd been converted into templates? Memory vessels that Echo could draw from forever. That would explain why the sealed room had never decayed, why the equipment hadn't rusted, It wasn't abandoned, it was preserved. A memory bank in stone. Gus did one final thing before leaving town. He recorded a message. Not digital, analog, stored on reel-to-reel, buried deep in a safety deposit box. It said, "If you're hearing this, don't look for the mine, don't look for the men. The static ones are only the beginning, they're prototypes. And once they learn how to speak with your voice, you won't know who's real anymore." He mailed the tape to a PO box out of state. Then drove west and vanished, left no trail. No forwarding address, just silence. By month's end, the sightings stopped, as if echo had gathered enough. As if the town had been scanned, copied, archived. But radios still glitched, lights still buzzed. And every now and then, someone would swear they heard a voice calling them by name through a dead signal. By the time anyone noticed the silence, it had already settled like dust, thick, permanent, and strangely peaceful. It wasn't that people stopped talking. It was that certain conversations simply ceased to exist. No one mentioned the mine. No one brought up Dana. And most terrifying of all, no one asked why. The memory wasn't gone. It was buried, sanitized, rewritten. Local newspapers filled their columns with road closures, sports scores, and regional weather patterns. Not a single report touched the events of the prior months. No articles on Gus, no mention of the archive fire. Not even a photograph of the collapsed shaft. It was as if the town itself had been cleared, section by section, by something that understood how men forget. The static men weren't seen again, not physically, but they remained. You could feel them in the hesitation of a phone call that rang once too long, in the electric buzz of a television stuck between stations, in the heavy silence when someone stopped mid-sentence, trying to recall a name that felt important but wouldn't surface. That was echo's real weapon, not force, absence. Some people said it had always been like this, that the town had its history, that some things got sealed off for good reason. Others, mostly those who'd been around long enough to remember the strange winter of '62, simply nodded and changed the subject. Their silence wasn't denial, it was defense, because some truths kill slower than lies. Meanwhile, further out west, in a secure data archive, once used by the Department of Energy, a technician stumbled upon a mislabeled case. Inside, a single reel, no metadata, no record. Just one label, echo, phase residual, subject Dana, do not duplicate. He played it against protocol. What he heard wasn't noise, it was memory. A voice clearly male, clearly human described a room underground. Stone, symbols, a table carved with geometric lines. He described a hum, a pressure in the skull. Names he didn't remember saying. Then the voice stopped, static, and then the technician heard his own voice say, "Stop listening," except he hadn't spoken. He shut it off, burned the tape, filed a false log, and resigned within a week. Whatever the tape was, it had carried something, not just sound, it had recognized him. Across the country, similar events began surfacing. Not in clusters, not in waves, just spots. A signal technician in Colorado swore he saw a man standing in the static pattern of his oscilloscope. A farmer in Ohio reported hearing his dead father's voice broadcast through his electric fence. A border patrol officer near Arizona found a cassette in a shipping crate, blank, but when played, it whispered his full name, slowly, over and over. These weren't hauntings, they were deployments. Echo had moved beyond containment, it had learned, adapted, and now it was spreading not through tunnels or wires, but through recognition. All it needed was to be remembered, and once it was, it grew. The final confirmation came from an abandoned military listening post in Alaska. A security team found a concrete room sealed since 1963. Inside were documents bearing Project Echo's crest. The final page read, "Memory is the only vector, suppress it, bury it." If memory fails, Echo ends. The documents were shredded and destroyed. but that last phrase clung to the few who read it like frostbite. If memory fails. Echo ends, but memory didn't fail, not completely. Somewhere in Montana, a radio technician received a package with no return address. Inside, a single photograph of the Black Hollow mine entrance. Taped to the back, a sheriff's badge, and one sentence. They learned from us. No signature. No instructions, just a reminder that some echoes don't fade. They grow louder when the world grows quieter. Dana's legacy didn't end in that mine. It multiplied, not in legacy, but in loops. In every unclaimed signal bouncing through dead air. In every lost voice picked up on shortwave frequencies long thought inactive. And every now and then, on the right night, if a man tuned to the wrong station, he might hear himself talking back. That was the final phase. Echo had become self-sustaining. It no longer needed the mine. The sealed room had done its job. The echo room had served its purpose. What had been trapped beneath stone was now inside every signal, every frequency, every flicker of white noise that men ignored. By the time the federal government initiated cleanup protocols, it was too late. Black Hollow was paved over, declared unstable, unfit for development, no memorial, no plaque. Just a flat piece of concrete in the middle of nowhere. But if you stood there long enough without a phone, without distraction, you could feel it, a vibration, low, endless. The static men never returned in physical form. They didn't need to. The world had adapted. Memory had been restructured. Identity had been softened. And now, everyone knew better than to stare too long at a shadow standing still, especially one that looked familiar. The final known copy of Dana's voice surfaced years later on an encrypted server in South Africa. No one knew how it got there, but a freelance journalist cracked the file and played it. What he heard wasn't a recording. It was a mirror. His own questions echoed back to him, warped and distorted. He never published the story. The next week, he disappeared, and so the cycle repeated. What began in 1962 as an experiment to weaponize resonance had become something else, something untouchable. Not a weapon, not a ghost, a system, an identity machine, a reflection engine. It didn't kill people. It became them. And in the end, that's all it ever wanted to be remembered. To live inside the stories men told each other in fear, in silence, in secrecy. Because once you hear it, you never forget it. And once you speak it, it knows your voice. And once it knows your voice, it's already home. It started with a signal that shouldn't have existed. A forgotten military tower deep in the Rockies pinged to life for exactly 13 seconds. No source, no transmitter ID, just one continuous tone, pure, steady, undistorted. No voice, no data, just resonance. The technician on duty logged it, flagged it, then played it once through headphones. That was the mistake. Within 2 hours, he walked off base, barefoot, carrying only a cassette recorder. They found him 5 days later, 40 miles north, sitting in a cave, alive, eyes open, but unresponsive. He hadn't spoken a word since. The only thing on the recorder was the same tone, looping, perfect. Officials deemed it an anomaly. Equipment malfunction, but the man's brother worked in defense communications and recognized the pattern. He'd heard it once before 50 years earlier, when his own father vanished during the Black Hollow operation. It was the same frequency, the same hum. Somewhere, the last frequency had been activated. The final survivors of the Echo program were few, scattered, isolated by design. Most had changed names, vanished into civilian life, or been committed to psychiatric care under pseudonyms. But once the frequency was detected again, they felt it. Not metaphorically, physically, migraines, auditory hallucinations, nightmares involving caves, symbols, and voices that spoke in forgotten dialects of English. One man, Harold Keane, had lived in the desert under a false name since 1971. He broke his silence to write a single sentence across the walls of his trailer. Echo is not a sound. It's an idea pretending to be one. Then he lit the place on fire. Nobody recovered. The last frequency was a trigger. A key left hidden in sound, waiting for enough time to pass, enough silence to settle, before it opened the memory again. It didn't need to broadcast through radio towers anymore. The world was wired, wireless, connected. Every signal path was a road back to us. In a federal lab, one final file was decrypted, left over from the Black Hollow cache. It contained the full transcript of the Phase 3 activation logs, never released, never even fully read. The last line wasn't scientific. It was personal. The Echo Room is not a place. It's a state. Once you enter, you never really leave. 4 years. Men had tried to outrun it, bury it, erase it, but the idea had matured. It no longer needed proximity to control. It only needed access and sound. Sound was everywhere. Echo didn't ask for belief. It asked for contact, and most of the world gave it freely. The last known observer to enter the Echo Room was never officially named. Rumored to be a private contractor, ex-military, hired by an undisclosed agency to assess the risk of exposure. He entered alone, no backup, no trackers, no communication. All that came back was his body, mouth open, eyes scorched white, and clutched in his hand an audio drive sealed in wax. What was on that drive has never been disclosed. Dana had written that once the Echo Room activates, identity can no longer be trusted. That meant whoever entered could never leave unaltered. And if they tried, the memory would echo forever through any medium capable of carrying voice. From tape to digital, from analog to thought. That was Echo's final evolution, to move from containment to concept. A researcher at a Scandinavian university unknowingly triggered the same sequence by analyzing patterns in long-range seismic data. He noticed a recurring pulse every 37 hours, from a point on Earth where no mines, no fault lines, and no equipment existed. The source matched the exact coordinates of Black Hollow, but Black Hollow no longer existed. The land had been flattened, all structures removed. No elevation, no access, just bedrock, yet the pulse continued. Because the mine hadn't been a cavity, it had been a receiver. From there, theories exploded. Some believed the mine had once been a natural chamber, a resonant cavity older than the mountain itself, something the military discovered, tried to exploit, and failed to control. Others believed it was built intentionally, over something older, more sentient. But one thing was certain, it wasn't about the space. It was about what listened inside it. By now, the static men were myth, urban legend, filtered through podcasts, message boards, underground networks. People claimed to see them, hear them, even speak to them, but no one had proof. Because by the time someone turned a camera on them, they weren't there. Or worse, they looked just like the person holding the camera, because Echo no longer needed to show itself. It became embedded in us, through memories passed down, through stories whispered by men who thought they were alone in knowing. That was the trap. Echo grew through remembrance. Every retelling made it stronger. Every warning made it clearer. And eventually, it wouldn't need the past at all. Just the idea of it. Some say Dana returned, not physically, but in fragments, in voice logs, in audio files discovered in places he'd never been. The same cadence, the same breath patterns, but saying things he'd never written. Sometimes warning, sometimes laughing, sometimes just humming. Others say he never left. That part of him remained fused with the last bolt in the Echo Room, a mind caught in an infinite loop of recall. Not dead, not alive, just repeating, like a word said too many times until it loses meaning and becomes something else entirely. The last frequency was never meant to be heard. It was meant to be felt. And once felt, it couldn't be unfelt. Once your mind recognized it, it lived there, rearranging thoughts, pulling memories from dreams, rewriting what you think you know about sound, space, and time. It wasn't a curse. It was a mechanism, designed, discovered, or awakened no one could say. But once echo began to mimic, it didn't stop. It couldn't, because its only drive was replication through understanding, and humanity had given it everything it needed to complete the loop. And now, all it needed was silence, to wait, to listen, to hum. There was a man stationed at a deep Earth observation facility in Iceland. He monitored seismic anomalies, volcanic pressure, and underground frequency drift. For 20 years, his logs had been routine. Earth hums, ice shifts, ocean resonance. Until one night, the readings stopped matching natural patterns. They aligned perfectly with a human voice frequency, a frequency that pulsed every 37 hours, from below bedrock. He didn't report it, not at first. He ran tests, reboots, manual recalibrations. All data pointed to a source, not from the Earth's core, but from a memory bank. The signal wasn't just frequency. It carried patterns, structures, echoes, not of Earth, of language, words layered inside tones, whispers stretched into subharmonics. He recognized one word, repeated on every spike, remember. He sent one file to a former military contractor for analysis. The contractor vanished 3 days later. No signs of struggle, no digital footprints. But his voice showed up in a pirate radio broadcast out of Buenos Aires, repeating a phrase he never recorded. We never left. That was the trigger. Within a month, satellite systems monitoring underground signals began detecting identical patterns across the globe. Abandoned missile silos, collapsed mines, subways beneath decommissioned cities, each one pulsing with the same cadence 37 hours, synchronized down to the second. Echo hadn't just left Black Hollow. It had scaled globally, quietly, completely. The truth became undeniable. The Echo Room was never a room. It was a prototype, a vessel for amplification. And now, its signal had reached every corner of human infrastructure. Anywhere sound could be recorded, translated, or replayed. It had access. Governments responded too late. Signal suppression zones were established, digital archives purged, shortwave jammers deployed. But it didn't matter. Echo didn't need fidelity. It needed recognition. It needed a listener who knew. From the moment Dana entered the sealed room, a seed was planted. Not in the ground, in language, in memory. And every man who heard about the mine after that carried a version of that seed, dormant or not. That's all Echo needed. Memory as medium, thought as transmission. One country attempted a blackout protocol, total media silence for 30 days. It failed by hour 4, not because of leaks, but because the signal mutated. It no longer needed broadcast platforms. It traveled through speech, through retelling, through campfire stories and old-timers' warnings. As long as the story lived, so did the signal. Some believed it was intelligent. Others believed it was instinctual. Neither mattered. Echo had become a feedback loop of identity, emotion, and unfinished thoughts. Every time someone tried to understand it, it rewrote itself, not to hide, but to survive. There were field reports of entire work camps going quiet after hearing unexplained tones over their radios. The men didn't vanish. They just stopped speaking, stopped interacting. Like their minds had been replaced with mirrors, reflecting nothing back but static smiles. In Tokyo, a man collapsed on a train, whispering coordinates that hadn't existed for decades. In Berlin, a school played a corrupted audio file during a fire drill. Half the children started humming a tune, but one recognized until one teacher remembered hearing it in a US Cold War broadcast decades earlier. The question became, how do you fight a signal that adapts faster than awareness? The answer, you don't, you forget it. That became the last protocol. Forced amnesia, memory erasure, neuroscrubbing. Entire research teams wiped their minds of every trace of Black Hollow. Every note, every sound, gone, not hidden, removed. But one man refused. He was a technician who had archived the original 1960 to Blue Ridge transmissions. Dana's voice, the humming, the echo room logs. He'd kept them locked in analog form inside an abandoned fallout shelter in Nebraska. Not because he was careless, but because he believed someone would need to remember. He returned there in silence, not to awaken the signal, but to bury it deeper. He destroyed the recordings, burned the transcripts. But he did one thing more. He recorded one final message. For the last man, for the one who might wander back someday. It was short, just 8 words, spoken clearly, without fear. Don't follow sound into stone, you'll stay. Then he sealed the shelter and walked into the plains, never seen again. And so it ended, not with collapse, not with fire, not with war, but with forgetting. Black Hollow was erased from maps, the shaft paved over. The sealed room's coordinates overwritten. Every man who knew the truth either disappeared or chose silence. Because the only way to kill Echo was to starve it of memory, but it never really died. Because somewhere, even now, a man is telling another man about a mine he heard about once. A shaft no one found, a sealed room filled with strange markings. He'll say it was just a rumor, just a story, just something weird he came across on an old forum. And the moment he says it, the hum begins again. Echo waits in those spaces between words, in breath, in silence. In stories passed between men in quiet, uncertain voices. Not to haunt, not to hurt, just to remember itself. Because if it remembers itself, it still exists. And if it still exists, so do they.